Hello, I'm JW. In this video we've got cables, or more specifically twin and earth cables, as in this style of type of thing. And this is what's typically used in wiring in sort of homes and some other types of premises. And it's primarily used because it's cheap and fairly easy to install. And this type of cabling has been used for literally decades, but it has changed a bit over the years. And we'll also have a look at some older ones to see what you might expect to find in older properties. Now this is a fairly typical piece of the previously mentioned twin and earth, and I say it's the most common type of wiring you have for wiring in houses, and it's often used in sort of offices and similar places as well. And it's primarily used there because it's cheap and it's easy to install. Now twin and earth, as the name suggests, has two conductors, which are the blue and brown in this case, and then of course the earth in the centre. And the earth there is not insulated, as you see there, it's just actually bare all the way through the outer covering. And of course the other two have the insulation over them. And the reason for no insulation again is because it's cheaper, and when you actually install this it's necessary to put the green and yellow sleeving over the exposed end, which of course adds to the cost and time of installation, but of course it's cheap to buy and therefore by far the most popular option. Now in terms of the size of these, it's referred to by the size of each of the conductors, and it's the cross-sectional area of the conductors. And in this case that's 2.5 square millimetres. Now you can't actually measure it, because if you went to measure it with this, it's not the actual width of it, it's purely the cross-sectional area. So as if you were looking on it sort of end on, it's the area of the end of each of the cores. And another issue with twin and earth is that although these are 2.5 square millimetres, the earth is often a smaller size, and in this case it's 1.5 square millimetres. So the size always refers to the actual main conductors. The earth in the middle, or the protective conductor, is usually a smaller size. Now in terms of sizes, the smallest is this one, which is 1 square millimetre, and this is the only one where actually all three are the same size. So you've got the single core there, which is actually 1 square millimetre as well, and this is generally only used for lighting, as it's pretty small, obviously not much use for anything above that sort of power. You can also get a 1.5, which is this one, and some people insist on using that for lighting as well, but there's no real need to use that unless the circuit is excessively long. But in most cases the 1 millimetre does just fine. But nevertheless there are some people out there who seem to think that it's essential to use 1.5 at all times, but in reality they're just wasting copper most of the time. And if you put the two together, see they are extremely similar in size, and unless you've got the two side by side it can be an issue to tell which is which. And the one we just saw there previously was this one, which was the 2.5. Generally that's going to be used for socket outlets and things of that nature, immersion heater circuit or that sort of thing. And this is one that's used for ring final circuits, which are probably made by the devil himself, but in any case it's probably the most common one that's used for that. So excluding 1.5, which is kind of redundant, 1 millimetre for your lighting, 2.5 for the power circuit, sockets and whatever else. And the next size up is actually 4 millimetres. That's seldom used for anything, but nevertheless it can be obtained if necessary, but say it's a very uncommon size. The next one up, which you'll most likely find in a house, is this one, which is 6 square millimetres, and this is the sort of thing you would use for your electric cooker and certain older types of showers, particularly the lower powered ones. And the note about this one here is that the cores are actually stranded on this one. But again, because the earth conductor in the centre is smaller, then that's actually a solid piece all the way through. Now if you have a large shower, one of those 10.8 kilowatt jobs, then you'll be needing the 10 square millimetre, which is this one. Those are going a bit black at the end for some reason. And on this one you'll notice that the core is actually, or the centre core there is actually stranded as well. So all three are stranded. So certainly for new cable it's generally a good indication as to which is which. If you've got a solid core, it's probably going to be the 6. And if you've got stranded it will be the 10. But that's not always the case, certainly with older cables. There have been older cables like this which are stranded, and even in this size which are stranded. So that's not a very good guide for the older type. But certainly for the new ones, if it's between 6 and 10, then 6 is solid core in the middle, 10 is generally stranded. And with the stranded ones, again it's the same cross-section area, but it's the total area of all of the strands combined. So if you measured one strand and then worked out its cross-sectional area, and then it's multiplied by however many strands you've got in the individual piece. Now there's a larger size than this, which is 16, which again is like that, only considerably bigger. That's again seldom used, but nevertheless it is available if necessary. And the final one here is this one, which is 3-core unearth, and this is generally only used for lighting circuits where you might have a light controlled from 2 separate switches. And this is the wire or cable that would go between the 2 switches. And it's coloured in brown, black and grey, easily confused in dark and dim locations. And as with the blue and brown, you would generally oversleeve the black and grey to indicate that they were both lines. And the other use for this is things like extractor fans, which might need a permanent line, a switch line and a neutral, so it can have the sort of overrun timer function. And again, in that case you would oversleeve the blue sleeving here on the grey, and then the black would have the brown sleeve to indicate it was the switched line. And as with the others, the earth conductor is bare and would need green and yellow sleeving placing over that. Now these brown and blue colours have been in use for about 10 years now. They were actually compulsory from April 2006, although you could in theory buy them from April 2004, so there's a bit of an overlap period. And the previous wiring was red and black. Here's an example, and red is now the brown and the black is now the blue. And these cables, or these particular colours, were in use for literally decades before that, so the presence of these colours doesn't really tell you anything about the age of the cable, other than it was prior to about 10 years ago. And if you've still got this in your house, and let's face it, huge numbers of properties will still have this, no problem in keeping that. The only difference between this and the new ones is simply that the core insulation is a different colour. The actual cable itself is exactly the same, it's still copper, and of course it's still got that reduced size earth conductor in the middle, and everything else is pretty much exactly the same, plastic insulation. So the fact you've got black and red in your house doesn't mean anything, it just means it was put in more than 10 years ago. And certainly there's no need to replace it unless of course the cable was actually physically damaged or destroyed or something. Now, so the older one's exactly the same. One interesting difference though is the colour of the outer covering. Now this particular one is white, and you can still buy the new colour one in a white covering, but the difference now is that the grey is pretty much the standard PVC insulation, and the white is of the type that when it sets on fire it doesn't give off toxic gases, so that may be specified in some installations. But before that you could actually get this with a white or grey covering, and it seemed to relate on where you actually lived. So if you lived in the southern area of the country you would typically get white, and if you lived in the north you would typically get grey, but why that was is not entirely clear. If anyone knows, then please put it in the comment section below. But in any case, whether it's on old cables, whether it's white or grey, it makes no difference. It's simply a colour change. And these two are the same size. These are 2.5 square millimetres, so as you can see the internal construction and layout is exactly the same. It's purely the fact that one's got red and black and the other's got brown and blue. Now certainly for older cables, particularly from the sort of 1970s or so, you'll find that the cores are actually stranded even on the smaller sizes. So this is sort of the equivalent of the 2.5 square millimetre, and you see it's got stranded cores on both of the conductors there, and also the earth conductor in the centre as well. And again you get things like this where you've got say stranded cores here and the solid core in the middle. This is I believe this is 4 square millimetres, although say maybe an imperial equivalent of that. It's not unfortunately marked on the outer covering. But again, the fact it's stranded doesn't change anything, it's still perfectly valid and acceptable to use. The one thing to watch for though on the twin in earth, certainly for the 2.5, is that the newer ones have 2.5 square millimetre on the conductors and the inner core is 1.5. But certain older ones, this being one of them, the cores here are still 2.5, but the inner protective conductor is only 1 square millimetre. That can have some issues depending on the protective device you've actually got for the circuit. And again, it's fairly difficult to spot unless you've got the two literally to compare one against the other. But nevertheless, there's a lot of it out there. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got to replace it, but say depending on the device that's protecting the circuit, sort of circuit breaker or fuse, then it may be necessary to revise the value of that. Here's some 1 square millimetre. And again, this is pretty much the same as the stuff you'd get today, other than the different colours. And again, we've got some here with the grey outer covering and some with the white. But again, it's just a pure colour difference in those cases. There's no difference between the actual conductors themselves. And again, as with the new ones, these are all just solid core, 1 square millimetre for all three. Now, going back even further, you'll find things like this, which is twin with no earth. So it's simply the red and black conductors, and there's no earth in there. And it's not just been cut off, it just didn't exist in the first place. And this sort of stuff was used on lighting circuits prior to 1966, when earths on lighting circuits was not required and therefore often wasn't installed. Now, if you've got this kind of cabling installed, it can still be serviceable. I mean, this is still plastic insulation, although it's going to be a fairly early type. But bear in mind, this cable is 50 plus years old now, and of course having no earth there means you're completely stuffed when it comes to fitting any kind of modern light fittings on there, because you're kind of condemned having plastic ones. And therefore, if you have got this kind of thing, it really is time that it was replaced. Simply the fact that, say, there's no earth conductor, and even though it may be in decent condition, it's still 50 plus years old, so over half a century. And this twin and no earth was made in a whole variety of styles. This particular one has stranded cores there, although it's a fairly thin size. It's probably an imperial size. You can also get it with solid cores, as we've got here. Now, these cores are a shiny silver colour, but this is because it's copper that's been tinned, so basically got a tin coating over the top. It is not aluminium wiring. Aluminium wiring did exist, but it was very rare and only existed for a very short time, and due to its problems with installation, it's all been ripped out and thrown away long ago. But this is tin copper, again fairly common with that, and you could also get the stranded variety with the tinning on it as well. And the way to check on these is to look at the end when you've cut it. That'll be obvious on the camera there, but the side is shiny silver, but where you cut it, see it's got the goldy coloured copper inside. And if you scratch away the coating, it will be copper underneath. So again, it may not show it very well on the camera, but so just scratching away, you get that goldy copper colour showing through. Now, tin copper wiring was very common, particularly up to the sort of 1970s and before. And again, there's nothing wrong with using it. The tin coating was there mainly to prevent surface corrosion. It's not put on cables these days because, of course, it's cheaper not to bother. Hence, you get things like this larger size here, which has gone horrible in black because it doesn't have any coating on there. And got another piece here, which again is the white. So again, it's twin with no earth. It just happens to be white, whereas this one happens to be grey. So again, nothing wrong with it, but realistically it's time for replacement as it's half a century old. Now, this stuff is the new one. This is the brown, black and grey, and prior to that being used, it was a much more sensible set of colours, which was red, yellow and blue. And as you can see, those show up far more clearly than the dull as dishwater European variety. And this one is a bit unusual because this is 3-core with no earth, which again dates it from that prior to 1966 period. Although you could get these colours, say, up to around 10 years ago with the additional earth core in there, just as with this one. And there was a short period where this stuff was actually made with red, white and blue cores. I don't have any of that here, but it did exist. But again, if you find any of that, it's going to be at least 50 years old. So really it's time for replacement. Now, going back even further, you would find things like this. Now, this is twin and earth, but the outer covering is rubber, and the insulation inside here is also rubber. This would again be dating from early 1960s and before, so this is going to be well over 50 years old, probably 60 or even more. And the problem with rubber insulation is that it deteriorates over time and crumbles away to dust. Now, these particular ones are in reasonable condition, but that's only because the part at the end here I've just stripped away. I've only stripped it away today, so it's been fully sealed in until now. And what tends to happen at the end is this will just break away and crumble, of course exposing the live conductors inside. So if you've got any of this in your house, it's not only time for it to be replaced, it should have been replaced a couple of decades ago, so certainly don't want to be finding any of this around. And again, this is the tinned copper again. You've got the shiny silver covering there. Again, if you scratch that, the copper will show through. And the centre one is tin copper as well. It's gone rather black because it's basically stuck to the rubber outside covering. And again, it's the same black and red colours as before. And just as with the others, you can get the smaller sizes here, as in twin with no earth. So again, the black and the red and the tinned copper shiny covering on the two conductors. And I've also got a piece here of twin red, which again will be for lighting only, and again the same kind of arrangement, just there, both red instead of a red and black. Now, one final note here with this particular item. Now, so there was a period of very short time where aluminium wiring was used, and the deal with that was that it was used because it was cheaper and there was a copper shortage, but the copper shortage didn't last for long. And the big problem with solid aluminium wiring is that when you come to attach it into things like brass terminals in sockets, switches and the like, then it tends to corrode and destroy itself very quickly. And there was some kind of special grease that had to be applied and make sure it's completely covered over so the air didn't get to it. And as you can imagine, it was a huge amount of bother. All of those installations are probably long gone, simply because they would have just fell apart by now. But for a short time in the 1970s, you could buy this stuff, which is apparently copper on the surface, but if you actually look on the end, it's actually silver coloured inside. And what this is aluminium core, but it has a copper plating over the top. So the idea was that it's still cheap to make, but the copper covering would make it perfectly fine to attach into brass terminals and the like. Now, in terms of identifying this, it's not easy, because certainly at first glance it just looks like copper with the stranded cores, much the same as some of the other examples that we saw previously. But if you look on the actual covering of the cable here, it's going to be pretty difficult to see, but you see at the end there it has the word copper clad, which is copper clad aluminium, so that's certainly a dead giveaway. But in the absence of that, if you cut it at the end here, then you'll see that the actual ends of the wire are a shiny silver colour inside, so that's the aluminium, and then it's just a thin copper plating on the outside. And it should also be able to scratch away the copper plating on the top. And then that should reveal the shiny aluminium inside. Again, it's not hugely obvious on the camera there, but say if you scratch it, then you'll see the aluminium coming through. And certainly if you hold it and cut it, it's considerably softer to cut through than the copper variety, and in the way it sort of bends and everything else is again completely different. And the biggest difference is the cable itself weighs virtually nothing compared to the copper equivalent, so if you had a big roll of this, it would be incredibly light compared to the copper equivalent of the same size. Now, this particular item is again fairly rare. It wasn't used for a particularly long period because, again, the thing with copper being very expensive didn't last for long. And of course, aluminium wiring has a number of problems, mainly that its resistance is significantly higher for any given size. So although it might be cheaper for a particular circuit, you've got to use a lot more of it. So the actual cost savings in that case were not particularly large. And of course, it went back to solid copper fairly shortly after that. But nevertheless, this does exist. This came out of a building only last year, which was being completely rewired. And of course there's probably still some out there somewhere. But if you have got this stuff, it's probably an idea to get rid of it, because again, the fact it's aluminium means it's going to have various problems when you connect it to terminals or things in sockets and the like. It's incredibly soft, so quite easy just to tighten up the terminal and slice through the conductor. And again, it's going to be 45, 50 odd years old in some cases, so certainly something you want to be disposing of. So, twin and earth cables, and the various sizes and colours of, but the fact that they're different colours doesn't really mean anything. It just means the red and black was 10 years old plus. But bearing in mind that PVC insulation, as long as it's not grossly overloaded or left out in the sun, should last for literally many decades, so no real reason to replace that. Out of this selection, the only things you're looking to replace would be the rubber covered variety, such as this black one here. And that's mainly due to the fact that it just deteriorates over time and crumbles away to dust. And bearing in mind that when rubber insulated cable like this was manufactured, the manufacturers gave it a 25-year lifespan, and it hasn't been made for at least 50 years, so a quarter of a century past its best. And of course it could be even older than that, because this was used for a considerable number of decades before. And the other thing here is that aluminium covered business, which again is probably okay to use, but it does have a number of issues. One of which is that if you want to have, say, a new consumer unit installed, you'll need to choose the appropriate circuit breaker or whatever that goes with it. And this stuff is not listed in the wiring regulations anymore and hasn't been for several decades. and there's no information about its current carrying capabilities, and therefore really it's high time that it was replaced. But nevertheless, if you've got it and it's still in there, well, it's probably okay to use for now, but certainly will be something to consider replacing, if not for the fact that the current capacity is considerably lower than the equivalent size in copper. So that's the cables there. Another time we'll have a look at actually installing these and how to fit them into things, but until then, thanks for watching.